I remember the exact moment I realized I wasn't welcome in the family I married into. Not truly. Not beyond appearances and surface smiles. It wasn't the whispers when I turned my back, or the way my mother-in-law always corrected the way I fed my son, or even the false kindness that lived in my sister-in-law's voice when she pretended she cared. No. It was the moment my little boy, only 5 years old, came to me with his lip trembling and said, "Grandma said I shouldn't call myself a Smith because I'm more like you." The whole house kept laughing in the other room, crystal glasses clinking, expensive perfume thick in the air. But something inside me shattered so violently, I swear they must have heard it. I didn't cry. Not then. I just held him, as if my arms could protect him from the cruelty of people who shared his blood. And I told myself something I had never dared to believe before. If I don't stand up now, they will teach my child that humiliation is normal. You might think that was the beginning, but it wasn't. That was the day everything cracked open. The real story, the truth I had tried for years to protect, starts long before that night.
Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We have a goal of reaching 1,000 subscribers, and your subscription is essential for us to get there. Don't miss the chance to be part of this journey and help us bring more amazing content like this. Thank you.
My name is Elena, and when I married Thomas Smith, I thought I was stepping into a new chapter of my life, one that would finally feel safe. I grew up with almost nothing, raised by a mother who worked until her fingers cracked to put food on our table. We didn't have a last name that mattered, or a legacy or land passed down from ancestors who had been somebody. But Thomas? He came from a family whose last name opened doors before their feet even crossed the threshold. Old money, old pride, old rules. When he asked me to marry him, I mistook the glitter in his world for love. They tolerated me in the beginning, maybe because they thought I wouldn't last. And maybe they were right. Some days, I didn't think I would either. My mother-in-law, Elaine, always spoke with that delicate tone that hid knives in every word. She reminded me of a swan, elegant, graceful, beautiful. But if you looked close, you saw the sharpness of her beak and the cold emptiness in her eyes. She greeted me at every family event with, "Elena dear, you look comfortable." Comfortable. As if I were a guest overstaying my welcome, as if my existence required a justification I didn't have. And then there was Charlotte, Thomas's sister, born with diamonds in her ears and disdain in her smile. She loved to say things like, "It's surprising Tom settled down so quickly. He was always meant for someone impressive." I used to smile back, small and polite, as if their cruelty couldn't reach me, as if I didn't hear the message in every sentence. You are not one of us. You never will be. But I stayed quiet. I told myself silence was dignity. I told myself I was protecting my son from conflict. I told myself a lot of things. The night everything changed, we were at the Smiths' estate for Sunday dinner. That house always smelled like polished wood and old secrets. My son, Jacob, was playing in the hallway with toy cars when I heard the voices from the dining room. Elaine. The boy has Elena's temperament. Quiet, soft. We'll have to fix that before school. Smith men are not weak. And his hair. It's darker. He doesn't look like us. People might talk. Then a laugh. A long, cold laugh. I stood frozen, holding a tray of dishes, unable to move. My chest felt like it was collapsing inward, but still, I said nothing. I had gotten too good at that. Later, during dessert, Jacob reached for a pastry and Charlotte snatched the plate away. "Careful," she said sweetly. "We wouldn't want you getting chubby. Right, sweetheart?" The room laughed again. But Jacob didn't. He just lowered his hand, his small shoulders collapsing as if the whole world had already taught him what he was allowed to take. That was the first time I raised my eyes and met Thomas's gaze across the table, silently begging him to speak. He didn't. He lifted his glass, cleared his throat, and changed the subject. I don't know why that moment cut deeper than the others. Maybe because I realized that sometimes silence isn't neutrality. Sometimes silence is betrayal. Later that night, when everyone had moved to the sitting room, I found Jacob sitting alone near the staircase. His eyes were red. "Mom," he whispered, "why don't they like me?" My throat closed. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Before I could answer, he said something I will never forget. "Grandma said I shouldn't call myself a Smith because I'm more like you." A part of me died. Not because of what they said about me. I had been called worse before life taught me to stop listening. But because they had carved those words into my child. I picked him up, held his little face in my hands and said, "You are more than a last name." A voice behind me answered, "Are you?" Elaine stood in the doorway, one eyebrow raised. I stood slowly, Jacob's hand in mine. "Don't speak to him like that again," I said. My voice shook, but I said it. She laughed, soft, surprised, amused. "Oh, Elena, this family existed long before you, and it will exist long after." "Yes," I told her, "but my son won't forget how you treated him." Her smile disappeared. The car ride home was silent. Thomas didn't apologize. He didn't even acknowledge what had happened. It was as if everything I had witnessed, every word, every humiliation, was something he had learned to accept long before I arrived in his life. Halfway down the road, I finally spoke. "Why didn't you defend him?" He stared straight ahead. "Elena, they didn't mean harm." "Say that again, and I will never forgive you." He didn't repeat it. He just kept driving. That night, after Jacob fell asleep, I stood in our kitchen staring at the check Elaine had given us 2 months ago. A gift for Jacob's school fund. I kept it tucked away in a drawer, untouched, because every time I looked at it, I felt something sick in my stomach. I knew money could build opportunities, but I also knew that some money was poison. And I had let poison into our lives. I ripped the envelope in half, then into pieces so small they became dust on the counter. My hand shook, but my chest felt lighter than it had in years. Maybe I couldn't change where I came from. Maybe I couldn't change them. But I could still choose what my child inherited from me. Dignity, self-worth, and a love that didn't break him. Before I went to bed, I walked into Jacob's room and sat on the floor beside him. He slept with his little hand tucked under his cheek, breathing softly, safely, trusting me. That was the moment I realized the truth. I had been trying so hard to fit into a family that did not deserve us. And one day, sooner than they expected, they would learn exactly what that meant. Because people like me, women like me, don't stay silent forever. Not when our children are being taught to shrink. Not when we finally understand our worth. Not when we realize that leaving sometimes is the loudest thing we'll ever do. I didn't sleep the night before the charity dinner. My mind replayed the way Margaret's fingers dug into my arm, the way those mothers' faces shifted from pity to superiority, and the way my son looked down at his shoes because he thought he had done something wrong. It wasn't the first insult, and it wasn't going to be the last, unless I ended it. I had a plan now, a quiet plan. The kind that doesn't scream, doesn't beg, doesn't throw plates. The kind that ruins a dynasty from the inside out. The ballroom was dripping with chandeliers and pearl-colored linen. Everyone there knew Margaret. Everyone respected her. She was the kind of woman who didn't build a reputation. She curated one. Daniel walked slightly ahead of me, his hand hovering near my back but never touching it, as if affection might be interpreted as weakness. I found my son sitting at the children's table. He looked like he didn't know whether he belonged there or anywhere at all. Margaret saw us and smiled, but it wasn't warmth, it was a calculation. "Oh, you made it," she said. "We were afraid you'd feel uncomfortable after yesterday. Sensitive people sometimes avoid social events, you know?" I held her gaze. I'm not the one who should be uncomfortable. Her eyes hardened, just for a moment before she turned to greet another guest. Daniel whispered, "Please, don't start anything." I didn't answer. It was already started. Near the end of dinner, Margaret tapped her spoon against a glass. "As many of you know, I take great pride in hosting this annual scholarship dinner," she began. "Our family has always valued generosity, especially toward children who come from less fortunate backgrounds." I could feel the air tighten around my ribs. People turned and looked at my son. They looked at him. A display piece for her charity victory. The same boy she told shouldn't speak to his own cousins. My fingers trembled around the stem of my glass, not from fear this time, from certainty. Margaret continued, "And of course, I must acknowledge my son Daniel and his wife, Wife. The word sounded like an inconvenience in her mouth. Who is doing her very best, despite her upbringing, to raise a promising young boy." A laugh rippled through a section of the audience. My ears rang. Daniel's jaw tensed, but he said nothing. And that silence was the moment I no longer mourned the man I thought he was. I stood up. The clinking stopped. The room stilled like a held breath. If they wanted a spectacle, I would give them something they would never forget. "I'd like to say something," I said, my voice even, amplified by silence. Margaret blinked. "Well, perhaps after." "No," I said gently. "Now." My hands didn't shake as I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Many of you know Margaret as a generous donor. What most of you don't know is that the scholarships she gives out are not funded by her. Confusion spread. A man near the front turned to her. "Is that true, Margaret?" A murmur grew, shifting like heat across the room. I didn't stop. "And when she refused to sign paperwork giving her full control of the trust fund, she punished my son. She told him he didn't belong here, that he was loud, wild, and not fit for our family." Someone gasped. My son's eyes widened, shining with something between fear and awe. Margaret stepped forward. "This is absurd. You have no proof." I lifted a stack of printed emails. These are her messages, calling my child a liability, telling her attorney to find a way to remove him from the trust entirely. The room erupted whispers, curses, disbelief. People who had shaken Margaret's hand minutes ago now recoiled like she carried a contagion. Daniel finally found his voice. "Why didn't you tell me you had those?" I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I did. You told me to let it go. Silence again, a different kind now. Heavy, accusing. Margaret lunged toward the papers, as if she could snatch her reputation back with her bare hands. "I will not stand here and be humiliated by someone who married into this family from where, Margaret?" I said quietly. "Go on, say it." Her lips shook. "Someone who thinks she deserves more than what we allowed her." There it was. Allowed. As if I were a stray they had taken in. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I don't need your permission to exist. And my son will never again believe he is unworthy because you decided he should be." I turned to Daniel. "I'm taking our son home. You are welcome to come with us, as his father. But if you remain silent again, then consider this your final decision too." His eyes brimmed with the truth. He had already chosen his mother long before this moment. And yet, I hoped. For him. For our son. For the man I once knew. Margaret hissed, "Daniel, you will not leave with her." Daniel closed his eyes. Then he spoke. "Mom, this time, you're wrong." She stared at him as if he'd stopped being her son. He walked to our child. He knelt. He whispered something against his hair. Then he stood beside us. And we walked out. Not fast. Not hiding. A family. Rebuilt in motion. People think the night I exposed Margaret was the moment she lost everything. They're wrong. That was the night she started to burn. The night she lost everything was 2 weeks later, when I discovered the secret she had killed for decades to protect, and when I realized my son was meant to be her next victim. For days, the city buzzed. Rumors, articles, meetings canceled, donations frozen. Margaret was no longer the benevolent matriarch. She was the woman who stole from her own grandchildren to build a throne out of charity press releases. Daniel and I barely spoke that week. He tried, he really did, but silence is not something you can repair with apologies. Not when a child has learned to fear his own bloodline. But what none of us knew was that Margaret was already planning her counterattack. She never lost quietly. It happened at 2:17 a.m., a private number. I answered because mothers don't sleep when they feel danger. At first, no one spoke. Then I heard it, a slow breath, the kind an animal makes when cornered. Margaret. Her voice was raw, stripped of pearls and posture. "You don't know what you've done." I said nothing. I wanted her to keep talking. "You think you can protect that boy? You have no idea what he was born into." Born into. The word struck something cold inside me. "I warned Daniel when he brought you home. You were not supposed to have a child with him. You were not part of the plan." The plan? Before I could ask what she meant, the line went dead. I stared at my son sleeping across the hall, tiny and brave, a child who apologized for existing. And I knew then, this wasn't about inheritance. It was about ownership. The next morning, a man knocked on my door. Gray suit, wire-rimmed glasses, eyes that had seen too many ruined families. He introduced himself as Harlan Pierce, estate attorney, Margaret's former attorney. Former. He placed a sealed envelope on the table. I'm breaking a 30-year silence, he said. I should have done it sooner. Inside were copies of documents, transfers, private notes, and, worst of all, psychological valuations done on family members without consent. Statements from Daniel's father, two cousins I had never met, a child who had been sent away at age 6, never heard from again. Harlan took a breath, like it cost him. Every generation, Margaret chose one child, one heir. The others were pruned. Pruned. My stomach twisted. Your son, he said, was next in line to be removed from access to the trust and, based on patterns, possibly relocated to an institution, quietly. The world spun. That's why she cared so much. Not that he might embarrass her, but that he might one day outrank her chosen heir. I didn't go to the police first. I went to her house, the mansion she guarded like a legend. Daniel begged me not to go alone, so he drove. We didn't speak, but this time the silence wasn't avoidance, it was purpose. I used the spare key from years ago. The door was heavy, expensive, and hollow in the way only rich cruelty can feel. We searched her study, her safe, her office, and finally, her basement. There was a locked room beneath the wine cellar. Not a metaphor, a real locked room. Daniel found the key taped beneath a drawer. When the door opened, dust floated like ash over a grave. Inside were boxes stacked ceiling high, labeled with names I recognized from family holiday photos. And then I saw it. A box with my son's name. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, a printed evaluation recommending his placement in a behavioral facility by age 9. A letter Margaret had drafted to the board claiming I was mentally unstable. A petition requesting temporary custody be granted to her. A list titled Methods for Managing the Mother's Resistance. Daniel's knees buckled. He didn't cry. He made a sound I had never heard from a human throat. And I suddenly understood. He had been raised in this system, conditioned to believe this was love. We didn't call first. We drove to her. She was at her lawyer's office, dressed in her finest, rebuilding her image like a cathedral. Her face froze when she saw the box. Daniel didn't raise his voice. You planned to take my son. Margaret didn't deny it. He deserved better than a mother who came from nothing. He deserves a legacy worthy of his blood. I stepped forward. This is my blood. She looked at me the way a queen looks at a trespasser. Not for long. Then she smiled because she thought she already won. That was the moment I knew I couldn't just expose her. I had to end the cycle. Harlan leaked everything. Not to tabloids, to investigative journalists who had been waiting years for a story like this. Headlines erupted. Local philanthropists linked to unauthorized child institutionalization plan. Charity funds connected to political favor network. Multi-generational psychological coercion alleged in a prominent family. Sponsors withdrew. Politicians denied knowing her. The charity board suspended her leadership. But the worst was still coming. At the custody hearing for trust oversight, the court asked who should assume temporary guardianship of the financial accounts for the children. And I said a name that made the courtroom gasp. Daniel. Not me. Him. Because the only way to break a legacy of control is to let the survivor reclaim the throne. Margaret's face contorted. He is not capable. Daniel stood up, and this time his voice did not shake. I was raised to be afraid of you. I'm not anymore. Silence. The judge approved the transfer. Margaret didn't just lose power, she lost ownership of fear. 2 nights later, police raided Margaret's property. Corruption, fraud, illegal medical agreements. When I visited her before sentencing, she was smaller than I had ever seen her. Not physically, spiritually. Why him? I asked. Why my son? She looked past me, through me, into some unfinished empire in her mind. Because power must live somewhere. I stood to leave. Not anymore. Not like this. My son laughs now. He doesn't watch doors when he eats. Daniel is in therapy, healing decades of inherited obedience, learning fatherhood without fear. As for me, I keep one box from the basement locked in my closet, not to remember danger, but to honor survival. Some nights I open it and remind myself, we did not escape a family. We ended a dynasty. And sometimes, ending a story is the only way to save the child who lives inside it.